Thank you all very much. I'm delighted to moderate the Decipher panel. If we can get the next slide, please. So, sorry. Oh, you can click her and I can click away. Wonderful. So, if you can't hear it from my accent, I'm from Australia. So we do have a custom of acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today, as well as in our case, on which where our organisation is based. So first, huge thank you to Tara and to Caesar in general for really kind of going above and beyond in terms of setting up and doing things like finding me meeting rooms this morning for this panel. So I'm Ben Phillips. I'm Chief Survey Methodologist at the Social Research Centre in Australia. I want to kind of, before turning over the panel, so just say a few words about how it will run, and then just a few opening comments of my own before we dig into the panel discussion. So what we're going to do is have about 45 minutes, and then the Q&A will be 15 minutes at the end of the session, so from about 1:30. Because I imagine this is something a lot of us here feel quite passionately about, so we want to give good time for audience discussion. So the aims of the panel, and you'll have to excuse my bad habit of using generative AI for the images in our slides. So this panel came about because of frustration experienced by my colleagues and I about conveying to potential clients and funders that respondents are not, in fact, a fungible commodity. And it really does matter for data quality whether a person signed themselves up to an opt-in online panel or came from crowdsourcing or from social media or as an actual person recruited at random via a sampling frame that covers nearly the entire population, which is essentially the definition, a reasonable definition for a probability sample. So in Australia, at least, we're operating in an environment where the default option for much government, non-profit and academic research is non-probability online panels. So we kind of go and sign yourself up typically. Although these trends may be more pronounced in Australia, I don't think we're alone. So at last year's APOR conference, there was the cheerily titled Adapt or Die panel discussion, which is a bit of a group therapy session for us all, on how research organisations are dealing with major changes in what we study and how we study it. And Stephen Blumberg of National Centre for Health Statistics, and I'll say more about that in a moment, talked about the beginnings of discussion about non-probability panels, obviously in his circles, which he thought he would never see, which I think is quite telling. So in terms of increasing challenges and costs, for most of you, I'm sure I won't need to elaborate the challenges we're facing pretty much anywhere around the globe in terms of response rates, which are low and falling. And also the fact that in order to get desired characteristics of sample, we're oftentimes using combinations of sampling frames and survey modes that would have seemed extraordinarily creative, or if not outright reckless, a decade ago. So going back to the APOR conference before that in 2023, Mansour Fahimi made a comment at a session I was moderating that there was a time when we cared about mode effects. I think kind of speaking to the combinations of modes that we're needing to use oftentimes these days. So in terms of fraud and data quality, so anybody who's worked with social media sample will have experienced fraud or attempted fraud. To read the literature of fraud detection is to hear the same story again and again and again across the journals of disparate fields. Wow, we go getting an amazing, number of completes coming in. Some of these responses don't seem quite right. And then the months of painstaking case-by-case review and the lingering doubt that you've managed to catch all the fraudsters. So outside of social media, of course, non-probability panels are also themselves locked in an arms race with fraudsters. smaller budgets and the need for speed are a global constant. Again, that was kind of one of the things that came up at Adapt or Die. Again, kind of that even kind of in the world of official health statistics, that the most important considerable dimensions of data quality were no longer accuracy and reliability, but timeliness and granularity. Now, at this point, I want to say we are, of course, meeting in Washington, D.C. at a time where we've seen DOGE defenestrate the NCHS and the National Centre for Education and Statistics, among others. And I want to take a moment to say I think our hearts are with our colleagues in federal government and the contractors whose research programs have been cut. We did have a federal employee who was unable to join the panel due to the requirement to have statements cleared by political appointees. So finally, clarity of communication about probability, about the value. So increasingly, we're running into researchers who simply have never heard of probability samples or have no notion as to what they are. So this is an observation at another panel at April last year that David made, as did another panelist. We've noticed similar things with younger staff in government agencies. So with that cheery outlook, I'm going to move on to the discussion. So what we're going to do is kind of have a prompt for specific members of our panel. We'll have a few others chime in. I will try and keep a track of time. But before that, we will have our presenters introduce themselves, and we might just run across here very briefly. So Karina.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. That was really super insightful. My name is Karina Cornesse. I'm head of the Department Survey Design and Methodology at GESIS Leibniz Institute for the Social Sciences. And that department includes the GESIS panel, which hopefully many of you know.
Hello, my name is Marcel Das. I'm the director of Center Data, a not-for-profit research institute housed at the campus of Tilburg University, the Netherlands. It was started in 1996 by Ari, and when he left for the States in 2000, I took over. At Center Data, we run the LIST panel. That's a probability-based online panel. Recruitment is done by Statistics Netherlands, so they give us the sample. And those who do not have access to the internet are provided with equipment. So that's the infrastructure I'm representing here.
Hi, I'm David Dutwin. I'm a senior vice president at the University of Chicago and the executive director of AmeriSpeak.
I'm John Krosnick. I'm a professor at Stanford in political science and communication and psychology and sustainability. And I'm happy to say that Stanford is now in the process of creating the new Stanford Institute for Excellence in Survey Research, which is going to be an exciting move, I think, for all of us. And I've been doing work in this space since the late 90s when we've been evaluating probability samples and non-probability samples.
Hi, I'm Anna Lethborg. I'm a director in the quantitative consulting team at the Social Research Centre. I was involved in the original design and build of our probability-based panel, Life in Australia. And since then have worked in, well, I guess, transitioned more to a business development role on the panel.
Hi, I'm Cameron McPhee. I'm the chief methodologist at SSRS. So I run our whole methods team, including the methodological work that we do on our SSRS opinion panel, which is another probability-based panel at about 50,000 now.
I'm Andrew Mercer. I'm a principal methodologist at Pew Research Center, where I work on the American Trends panel, which is our probability-based panel that we've started in 2014.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. So I'm going to put my first prompt there for John. So who are the audiences that we're addressing?
So I guess if we think about a comment that somebody made at this conference, a young person who might be here today at this conference last year who got up at the microphone and said, I think, am I hearing that people in this room are pretty much in agreement that probability samples are a good thing? That yes, we're pretty much in agreement on that. So the question for all of us at this session is, who are we trying to educate about that fact? And there, in a way, the answer is simple. First category is people in the news media. This is not in any particular order. As an example, ABC News and Washington Post have been using the Ipsos Knowledge Panel increasingly lately, and certainly news media organizations are going to continue to do surveys because surveys bring them clicks, which means brings them revenue. So that's kind of audience number one. Audience number two is commercial companies selling, let's say, other products, whether it's Google or Coca-Cola. Those folks are regularly going to firms like Ipsos and the Knowledge Panel for data. There are, I think, different categories in that world. The companies like Google that essentially have as much money as they need, and others that maybe have less and are a little bit more budget oriented. Then there are, I want to single out Procter & Gamble for anybody who doesn't realize that they deserve special credit, that they were the first to sound the alarm when the shift was made to non-probability samples and say, these data look nothing like they should look. And they're, in Cincinnati selling us toilet paper, but they get special credit for that, I think. Then there are academics, and I think it's really important to recognize that academics live in their little silos, that psychologists are increasingly collecting online data without any regard for representativeness at all. That's my home field, I can say that. That it's just the presumption has always been what you do in data collection in psychology is so fundamental to being human that it doesn't matter who you're studying, you get the same results regardless, despite the fact that every paper has moderator variables showing that the process differs by different kinds of people. So that's one audience to sell to where there's a challenge. Then political science now, as you may know, has become addicted to surveys, online surveys in particular. It's really hard to publish a paper in political science without a survey experiment, they call it. But again, they're all drinking the Kool-Aid, and it's inexpensive and easy to do non-probability samples. And I included have done lots of experiments with non-probability samples. Then you've got public health and people in business schools and people in medicine and people in sociology. And each of those have different standards. They're different audiences. They publish in journals that have different standards for acceptability. So we have to think of those all as separate audiences, I think, in the discussion to follow. And lastly, and most importantly, in some ways, the government. And the exciting development recently is the creation of the Census Household Panel, and I'll credit Jenny for that. And that was, major step for the government, and it's functioning today, and hopefully it will be functioning tomorrow and the next day. And that's one of many signs. But Marcel, over dinner last night, educated me about how many new probability sample panels are being created around the world. We heard about some other ones earlier today. It's very exciting that this agenda is continuing, but there's a lot of people have to be convinced, and that's what we're going to talk about next.
Wonderful. Were there any other reflections on that, or if not, I'm very happy to take the time and to ask Marcel if you'd be able to, sort of what do probability panels offer that others do not?
I think that's something we should pay attention to, because if we are talking about probability-based panels and non-probability-based panels, we first think about self-selection, and like the UAS and the GACES panel and also our LIST panel, we offer equipment to non-internet populations. So we do whatever we can do to make sure that we include all those who should be in the panel. But we have much more to offer, and that's something I think we should emphasize many times and many occasions. For instance, the openness of all data we have available. In the LIST panel that started in 2007, we are collecting data every month. So for 45 minutes, summing up with different questionnaires. But we also have a core questionnaire, a questionnaire that I think it's in total 100 minutes of interview time, and that's spread over different months. We collect all these data since 2007, year after year, and we offer these data to the entire academic community and those who want to use the data for public for policy research as well. So, and that's something many times we forget to explain to the audience, that we have quite a lot to offer, and that's cost efficient. I remember a long time ago, some researcher came to our LIST panel and had an entire project plan, and I told him that it was only one additional question to be asked, and the rest could be taken from the archive. And that's something that we should emphasize, and I think that's something that differentiates us from the non-probability-based panels who will also collect data, but they do not offer this opportunity. Another thing, and I think that's done by ARI in the UAS, but also in the LIST panel in the Netherlands, we can link to admin data. So our sample comes from Statistics Netherlands. So Statistics Netherlands know those respondents, and they offer linkage to all admin data in their remote access facility. And that's also something that adds to the possibilities we offer with these probability-based panels. So that's something I think we need to tell the whole world much more than we do right now, that we have these data available, which is cost efficient and can be used by anyone who's interested in data from our panels. We also have a network of users. I think a conference like this really helps. We did it in the Netherlands, like Ari was referring to a long time ago with the MES workshops. Also brought together an audience like this and just make sure that we have make the best out of the facilities we have. But I think that's also done by the non-probability-based panels. But as academics, we also help our researchers to come up with good questionnaires, because many people think that, putting together a questionnaire is very easy, but this is just top of the bill. So you can, if you want to have good questionnaires, that's also very helpful in getting good data. And that's certainly done with the academic probability-based panels. So there's quite a lot we have to offer, but I think we are too modest in telling this to our audience, not only the academic community, but also to policymakers. Make sure that these kind of infrastructures are very helpful and cost efficient.
Yeah, I just want to second that specifically about, I mean, I think, we have to recognize that all of the panels represented here sort of serve different audiences and work in slightly different ways. But I think the data linkage piece, it's something that we've been thinking a lot about. And I think it really is a value add of these probability panels. If we really dive into that, even if we don't live in the Netherlands and have a list of administrative data, that would be awesome. But I think, we've been working, I know that Q and us on voter lists and things like that. We've augmented our address-based recruited probability panel with EPA data, which hopefully will continue to exist, and are looking into other sorts of geographic-based auxiliary data, not just to add, it adds value to clients who might want to augment their data or not have to collect it, but it also broadens the research questions that they can ask and answer with the data that they are collecting. And methodologically, it adds a huge set of information to help us recruit better, recruit more representative samples, make sure that we're covering different sectors of the population that we didn't know we were missing necessarily. So.
I was going to add one thing, and hopefully this isn't stepping on any later discussions' toes, but another thing that I think they offer sort of implicitly, we usually think about the benefits of random sampling from a statistical perspective, but there's also sort of a lot of quality assurance and visibility into the process that you get when you're using probability-based methods, even if you're not doing any sort of design-based inference or basing anything on randomization. So it's sort of just some features of the process itself that have external benefits that I think often aren't appreciated.
So I guess my next question is for Karina. So do you think how much of a barrier is cost, or are there non-cost barriers?
So I think that's an interesting question. And actually, Marcel mentioned all of the reasons, all of the benefits that we have out of probability-based panel studies. But actually, it seems to me from discussions with some researchers that some of the things that we consider great benefits aren't always benefits to those researchers. Like, for example, that the data is publicly available. So data ownership. So if you use a commercial non-probability provider, you can you can be the data owner, you can keep the data as a secret, right? And in particular with panel infrastructures that offer data collection free of charge in the academic world, like for example, the GESIS panel does. It's of course the reason behind offering that is to make all the data publicly available for everyone for reuse, right? And so, but this is one of the barriers. So the cost would be very low of collecting your data with such a panel infrastructure, right? There's no financial cost to it, but you're not the data owner. You cannot keep it a secret. So that's another type of cost. And for some researchers, that seems to be an important one. Also, there are often standards that people have to fulfill, like transparency guidelines, right? So you have to submit all of the information, like all the survey questions. You need to tell everyone about the survey question sources. And so the documentation is quite a bit of work for the researchers. And that's also a cost to them that sometimes they may not be willing to take. So costs for them may be the things that we regard as benefits, right? So that's a problem. And I think we're sometimes being too modest. That's true. I agree with Marcel, but I also think there are some problematic incentives, like to be able to keep your data a secret, not document it properly for other people to reuse. And also there's an incentive to be just always quick, right? So gather data quickly rather than of high quality. And I think we also need to work on overcoming these disincentives to open data and have some more quality standards that people have to, especially in research, have to adhere to. We have those standards, but still it doesn't always seem to be enough to me.
So I might jump across to Cameron to talk about kind of what are some of the other ways that, hitting the wrong button there, you know, how else can we use probability panels? What else can it enhance?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit, and we've seen some of it already this morning, this notion that that there are ways to blend panels, to blend probability and non-probability panels. And I would argue that, you know, if the selling a probability panel to a user is sort of the best possible thing, maybe, and non-prob is at the other end of the spectrum, the blending the panels might actually be better than halfway, right? Like, so we're doing a lot of work internally. You know, we know from the work this morning and stuff that we've done in the past that calibration on weighting variables, on demographics maybe isn't enough. Probability panels can offer the ability to calibrate on non-demographic variables, attitudinal and behavioral variables to sort of counter some of the selection issues that we know exist. But the other thing that we're discovering that probability panels help us with is some of the fraud detection that isn't being caught necessarily. Because if you make the assumption, whatever, you know, that your probability panel data is at least free of intentionally bad actors, that the patterns that you're seeing in your data should be systematic to some extent. And if you could use that, and we're seeing some success rates in using the overall sort of covariance patterns in our data to flag cases in non-prob data that look unusual, that look like they could use further investigation. So I feel like the probability anchor isn't just about representativeness or weighting and model-based calibration. It can also be about fraud detection and using that. And I think there's still a lot of work to do to figure out, you know, what is enough, how much probability data do you have, what can you do with it? But I think there's a lot of room there, and I think that could be a selling point to certain audiences.
So I guess Andrew, so I mean, are there potentially hidden costs for not using probability data?
Yeah, so hidden costs of non-probability samples. there's a few ways I guess that I think about cost. The obvious one is how much does data collection cost, right? But then there's also sort of two others. One is the cost associated with the work you have to do on the back end with the data that you collect. So with you have to do data cleaning and whatnot with all kinds of samples, but with non-probability samples, the fraud issues that Cameron just mentioned, and some of the problems with bogus respondents and people who are just completely making up their answers in ways that are really systematic and problematic. Those take a lot of effort and time to get out of your data. And then it feels like you're throwing away data, even if it's not, real data. To some extent, you may end up having to pay for some of those cases. Some vendors don't make you do that. And then, there are vendors who are, cleaning the data or screening on their end, but then there's sort of uncertainty and you still have to do a bunch of checking. Everybody who works with these kinds of samples I should say that everybody who really cares about data quality but works with these kinds of samples, even when vendors do screening, they go in and do additional checks, and you have to include attention checks and things like that. So you're also eating up questionnaire space. So there's all of this work on the data processing side, and you can never really know how successful you were. And then there's also the sort of cost of being wrong, right? So how important is it, what bad thing happens if you get an inaccurate result? And if the answer is nothing, then maybe it doesn't really matter, right? If you are making a high stakes decision based on the data, then that's a whole different calculus. If you are worried about reputational risk, if you are a public pollster who, like Pew, puts out data, it's important. Like, we are not making decisions on the basis of the results that we collect, right? But it would be very easy to lose your credibility very quickly with a few sort of high profile, embarrassing findings or bad results that somebody could point out. So now there's ways of reducing the risk of being wrong, but that involves usually more work, right? So you can do more sophisticated modeling. You can collect more sophisticated auxiliary data to correct and adjust your data. But then that is all additional work that requires a lot more sort of specific expertise. There are certainly these kinds of problems with probability-based samples too. I mean, we see that we get way too many civically engaged people, and we haven't really been able to fix that. But I think one important difference there, though, is that I think we have a good idea about what it might take to fix that. And the problem is the auxiliary data doesn't really exist. And when we discover new problems, there's visibility. It's easier to sort of theorize about what the source of the problem might be. So that still work. I guess that's not really a hidden cost of opt-in samples, but I think sort of confidence in your, in being able to put stock in your data and your results is pretty critical.
And I think we had an example from John's research. So and maybe John, you're best placed to talk through this.
Yeah, I'll just say this is very simple. This was illustrating, I think, Andrew's point about the cost of being wrong. On the left-hand side, this is a probability sample, telephone RDD, landline cell phone survey asking in the last month, have you seen a movie? And 55% of people said they had. And on the right side, you'll see 7 opt-in panels, answers ranging everywhere from 65 to 93%. So depending upon which of those you are, you could be off by a little or a lot, and you have no way to know. The left-hand side with the telephone, we've replicated that number many times with probability samples. So it's just much more stable.
And probably fair to point out that I think this was pre-COVID and possibly before Netflix's domination of television sets everywhere. So I might move on to...
One additional thing with related to this, as you say, you've replicated this number, this 55% number over time. I think to Andrew's point, the cost of being wrong, a lot of non-probability sources are also used for trending, for people that are making trending studies. And so if you end up post-COVID at some point with a different number and have to try and go back and figure out, is that real? I mean, this could really be a change, or this could be a data problem. And then you've invested a lot, and then you go on sort of cleaning out data just because it doesn't look like your old data, right? So there's this other question of what's the cost of being wrong and missing something that's really changing because you're so rigorously getting rid of anything that looks weird.
Just to change track slightly. So, Anna, what do you think the focus should be for messaging and communication?
Hi. So this is something that I spend a heap of time on. Excuse me. We have, as John said, different types of clients, some who are very well informed about the importance of using probability-based samples, and others who, might be very keen to use opt-in panels. We have found it a lot easier to communicate the benefits of probability-based panels, or panel in our case in Australia, by doing comparative studies. So our online panels benchmarking study we did kind of to justify building the panel in 2015. And that became a really, really useful selling point because we had charts that looked pretty much exactly like the last one, where our probability-based approaches were much more accurate when compared to really high quality benchmarks than the opt-in panels. So that's handy. But in between those times when you don't have that anchor point that you can clearly show people to say this is more accurate and it matters, I have found it really hard to sometimes cut through and help people understand that if an opt-in panel looks more representative, that's because they've quota sampled, so it looks like the population. Our panels don't look as cool because they have the usual biases that we see in probability-based samples. So I've found that a bit of a tricky thing. And one of the points I wanted to make was in Australia, we had a referendum recently, and basically the population was asked to vote yes or no on what shouldn't have been a contentious topic. And the no campaign came up with a slogan, if you don't know, vote no. And they won. So that's what it feels like to me a little bit with the opt-in panels. So if you don't know and you don't really have a huge budget, just use opt-in. So how do we communicate the difference in importance or accuracy? And I just want to throw that out to other panelists, to the room. It's why we came up with this topic. Love to hear how people think we can get that understanding across.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. I mentioned a couple of things that make probability-based panels unique. That the other thing is that we are transparent. So, and that's also very important. That's something we should continue. So when we set up the list panel, we had a recruitment rate of 50%, 50. That's quite a lot. But we also thought, well, if you have 50% in, you have 50% not in. So let's focus on this group and show to the audience what this group is and dig into this. And that's also very important. Be very honest about what you have and what you offer to your clients. And that also is different from companies who have opt-in panels, I guess.
So I don't know that I have an answer, but I have a crazy example, I think, of this. And I would love to have people's thoughts. And it has to do with, Andrew, with your data from Pew. So when the most recent NPORS data, their high quality, 30% response rate, ABS, non-panel survey came out, and people started posting on social media questions about demographics and party ID and things like that. And one of the comments was, "You can't believe the survey data. Look at this study that Pew did that showed how bad opt-in data are." So there was this question of like, well, but like the challenge isn't even just communicating the value of probability data. It's communicating what probability data is.
Yeah, I'd love to jump, and maybe I'll jump and segue to my 2 bits too, as the last person here standing. You know, I was thinking about what I was going to say last night, and I was watching Severance. Anybody know the show Severance? I don't know which one we are. I think we're the innies, maybe. When I went to the Quirks conference last year, we had this panel, you know, we had the Skin for Amerispeak probability based, and, you know, and we were trying to sell our wares, and every single person we met asked me the question, what's probability? So, you know, I don't mean to try to be provocative here, but I think, you know, we have this amazing problem that, you know, we're kind of, and I can't figure out the metaphor. I want to say like landline phone, but, you know, anytime something progresses, it progresses to something better. And here we've progressed to something worse. But, you know, I mean, my question is that Ben asked me to answer is a little bit of like, who do we need to talk to? Who are the audiences? And I would submit, first of all, that, you know, the reason I bring up Severance is because, like, you know, I'll see half of you at APOR this year, and we'll all gloriously talk about probability and how much non-probability sucks. And, you know, who cares? We're at APOR. We're preaching the gospel to all of the people who go to church 5 days a week. Like, you know, so I would submit that, like, we need to go out and present papers not at APOR. You know, you go to APSA, it's dominated by, as John said, like, you know, non-probability has taken over a huge swath of political science. These are survey social scientists who were trained in the scientific method. And yet a lot of them no longer remember their Stats 101 course from 30 years ago. And like, what's probability? They still don't know. But yet when you go to APSA, you never, or, you know, APA or PAA or whatever other acronym, you never get a presentation, or it's very rare to get a presentation of someone trying to show, you know, and this movie going thing is not new, right? The Foundations of Quality did what is it, like 15 years old now, showing smoking status across 17 non-probability panels, of which, you know, the mean answer was something like 27% when the RDD got 18. Some of those non-probability panels found that 35% of Americans are smokers when the real answer at the time was 18. And yet, you know, here we are 15 years later. So I don't know, I've gone over my time, but I will just end by saying a little bit. We may want to think about going on the offense instead of the defense. You know, we sit here and no offense to hugely respected colleagues in this room, but we're talking about why we're anxious about a 4% response rate. Like, political campaigns are won by those who set the agenda, and we have allowed non-probability vendors to set the agenda, where all we're doing is defending how 4% still is great. And I believe it is. I mean, I've published in, specifically a paper trying to compare non-probability to extremely low response rate probability samples, and found that those extremely low probability samples, whatever it is, they're robust. They still do the job. And we don't make that argument. We just sit on the defensive while they, so again, this whole bot thing is a huge opening, I think, like for us to go on the offensive and, frankly, sow some real distrust in non-probability samples. Anyway, I'll stop there. Sorry.
So I'm going to take up David's challenge and tell you that the Stanford Institute for Excellence in Survey Research is committed to doing that, to going on the offensive. Because if you think about somebody at Coca-Cola who's just hired into the market research department, and it says, okay, I'm supposed to do a survey now. Who should I get the data from? Well, last time we did it with so-and-so, maybe, we got some competitive prices from a few. How do they know how to find out? Well, if they went to Anna would be selling her panel. But what we're going to do is sell all the panels. So the idea is to have a one-stop place online that says, what is the evidence? So David mentioned the Foundations of Quality study. I don't know how many of you even remember that study. It's somewhere long ago buried in our laptops. But what we're going to do is pull it all together, put it all right there in an integrated website that talks about what is the evidence about the accuracy of non-probability samples compared to probability samples. What's the evidence about response rates being low and being a problem, and so on. And I hope you will join us. And if you don't mind, Ed, I'm going to mention you. Ed Freeland at Princeton has already volunteered to join us in this effort, and Harvard is going to participate as well. And if there are others who want to help us do this, we would love to have you do that. And that's that. So in other words, we're not selling anything other than scientific methods that are rigorous. That's it.
So I guess just before I do open it up to the floor, just if any of the panelists, I really should have called this a meta panel, have had any sort of reflections besides that kind of on, what next and, what should we be doing?
I mean, I'll just, maybe prelude, shameless plug for my keynote address tomorrow. But, I think in this whole getting back to sort of 4% and being on the defensive, like, we're sort of sitting a little bit in shame at like our low response rates and the things that may be unsavory about panels. There may be conditioning. We may be overusing people. People are attriting from our panels. Oh my God, and maybe we just need to just be completely open with what we are and be proud of the fact that it's still good science. And then, you use that to sort of allow ourselves to not have to sit on the defense all the time, but to, again, go on the offensive. So another thought.
I'm very grateful for that question, what's next, because I think we've talked about the problem for a long while, or at least as long as I'm in survey research. We've talked about the problem. And so I think it's time that we talk more about solutions. I think we've heard from some of the panelists many good ideas for solutions. My idea is also that we need to engage more in organizations that set standards so that and make sure that these standards are adhered to, like, for example, transparency standards, and also communicate to new audiences. I think David mentioned it already. I've recently wrote a blog post for a market research platform, which is not what I usually do, but talking specifically about what is probability and why are some of the surveys that we see, particularly in market research, but also in social science research, for the garbage can, quite frankly. So finding a way to communicate also in the language that the other audiences need to hear is something that I think is crucial. And visiting other conferences is certainly another one example of what we can do.
Well, thank you very much. So I will now, we've got about 15 minutes. Well, we have 15 minutes left, so I might open it up to the audience. And